You have a brick to sell. You want to sell it to one of these two people. Person one buys and sells bricks all day. Person two has a house entirely built except for one brick. Who do you think is going to pay more for your brick? In today's video, we're going to talk about why strategic acquirers pay more on average for companies. What are they looking for? What is the underpinning logic or analysis? And how do you ensure that you can utilize that leverage when you are ultimately selling your company? I'm Arthur Petropoulos, Managing Partner and President here at Hillview Partners. We're a middle market investment banking firm. We've sold hundreds of deals in every single industry you can imagine all over the world. But primarily what we are doing is selling smaller companies in the grand scheme of things. I mean, sometimes they're billion-dollar companies, sometimes it's $10 million, sometimes it's $2 million, but selling smaller companies to very large strategics. And what does that dance look like and how do you optimize it? That's what we are experts in. But nonetheless, to today's video, first, let's define what is a strategic acquirer. Because typically when people think of selling a business, they break down acquirers into two things. They say, okay, we have financial acquirers, which are private equity firms, and we have strategic acquirers, which are standalone companies. But it's not really that simple. We tend to break the world down into really three primary buckets for the companies that we sell. The first is standalone or are standalone strategics. Those are going to be your Fortune 500 companies, just very large operating companies. The second is, on the other end of the spectrum, private equity firms that are looking for new portfolios, new platforms, new things to buy, new things to get into. And the third, which we would consider still in the realm of strategics, institutionally backed strategics, are private equity firms that already own a platform company that they are buying other adjacencies or complementary businesses for. So within those three buckets, we like to think of the realm of strategics as standalone strategics, as well as private equity owned portfolio companies where there's already something happening. And the reason for this, and we'll talk kind of two quick case studies here, or two scenarios. There's two driving factors as to why strategics pay more and why they can see your company as the brick that they need to finish the house, or the missing puzzle piece, as we like to call it. And so if you think of it, primarily private equity is buying and selling companies. And if they don't have something to attach something to, it's hard for them to deviate too much from the fundamentals of the business, that being purely kind of the revenue and EBITDA that a company makes. Now, they will look forward and say, what can we aggregate and what strategy there is? But fundamentally, if someone's just doesn't have anything else that this can go to, it's going to be bought largely on the economics of the business. Now, that's different from the other two buckets that we said, because there are two things that they can look for that can add value beyond just what you have in your company as a standalone business. The first of these is access. Now, case study one is we sold a distribution company. This is a company that bought lots of materials and goods and products, and they actually sold it into pharmaceutical clean rooms. And so biologics, therapeutics, places where they're making drugs in small batches, big batches, but very sterile clean room environments. So it's about as detailed as is necessary. But as you can imagine, there are hubs for this kind of activity throughout the country. There's Texas and Minnesota and Cleveland and Florida and California. And in this case, it was Boston, which is obviously a big hub in this space. So you have a national company, this is the acquirer, the strategic, that was looking to get into the Boston market. They needed access. They basically had all these different things that they sell to people all throughout the country and all throughout the world, but they can't sell it into this one space because they don't have the reputation, the brand, the inroads. Okay, as much as we like to think that all business works perfectly on logic, at the end of the day, it's still very relationship driven. And so you cannot teach a new dog old tricks. You can't get into an industry that's been around for 100 years, where there's 100 years of relationships. A lot of times it's easier, and this is something to highlight in this video, to buy rather than build, right? If someone can get something faster, get penetration to a market quicker, they will largely like to buy it instead of build it. And so in this situation, the company we were selling, when we talked to standalone private equity, let's say was getting a multiple of X times, just stick with X, right? And X was a high single-digit multiple, let's call it. Now, when we went to this particular acquirer, they said, well, look, everyone else may be buying it for X. We said, perhaps. But what's it worth to you? You, as the acquirer, are going to be able to not only continue the good business that's already going on, you are also going to be able to sell everything else that you sell to everybody else into this market that they can pay, let's just say 8 times for business, right? They were going to look at you and say, we'll pay 8 times your EBITDA. If they can now look at it from the perspective that they'll pay 8 times of the implied EBITDA of what they will get from the company, all of a sudden their 8 times might be your 10 times, might be your 12 times. But that's the way this works. You want to look at, and kind of the overriding thesis of this video is the implied EBITDA to the acquirer. What is it worth to them? What is a fair return to them based on what they're going to make? You don't want to sell it necessarily on just what it's worth to you as a standalone, right? But only a strategic could do that because they already have a business that does something. So in that case, we were able to sell the company for 30% more, uh, at least, to a larger acquirer because they were buying the access. And immediately after the transaction, they were able to sell everything they sell into that market. Now, let's look at number two. And so if access is the first differentiator of a strategic and why they can pay more, the second is capabilities. So in this second case study, we have a company that we represented that did certain industrial services. So think of preparation and cleaning of highly specified, kind of ISO certified manufacturing situations. So think of companies that work within warehouse and sell components into products that are manufactured for data centers. But at a high level, think it's a very, very specialized cleaning business. Now, there's another company called this Big Strategic. In the first case, the access case, was actually owned by private equity. In this case, it's a standalone, very large strategic company, multi-billion-dollar business. And this particular company, the acquirer, they provided lots of different services into these manufacturing companies. So they provided some supplies, they provided different kind of, whether it was management services, they actually got into some staffing, but you can imagine like they were a large services provider and offerer of different things to manufacturing companies. However, they didn't do this type of specialty cleaning. So in this case, think of a company that provides lots of different things to lots of different people throughout the country and globally. However, they don't provide this cleaning service. So again, now they're looking at the EBITDA of the company we are selling. And so let's say the kind of standalone private equity firm was again going to offer 8 times for this particular business. Well, now this buyer says, and many times, obviously, it's part of their own analysis, and that's why they're trying to say, is it a good idea? And this is why acquisitions happen. This is the idea of things being, synergistic or creative. As they said, you know what? If we were able to sell that cleaning service, who sells it to 100 customers, to our thousands of customers, we'd be able to double the EBITDA almost immediately. Exactly, right? And so now, let's say if they called standalone private equity was going to pay 8 times for this company, if they said, you know what, 8 times to them is 4 times to us. And so we say, well, what's 8 times to you, right? And all of a sudden, the price almost doubled. And it was going in that direction. It's not like they tried to offer half as much. I mean, they were already coming in considerably more aggressively than other people, but we were able to push it even further because we said, look, you are paying a fundamentally better multiple for this business. If you think most publicly traded companies historically, now they're trading at like 30 times earnings, but historically they've always traded at about 15 times earnings, sometimes more, and that's on a post-tax basis where EBITDA is pre-tax, so it's actually a little bit higher on a pre-tax basis. But nonetheless, if you say round numbers, 15 to 20 times is where the public markets trade. If they pay for something that's 8 times the EBITDA it will be worth to them, they are already making money because if they put that into the public market, it's going to trade at 15 times, let's say, immediately. So you can see kind of the alchemy, if you will, of the private equity or the acquisition food chain is that they can buy something that makes you 8 times, right? That's valued at 8 times to call it the broader agnostic, brick buyer and seller market. They can pay almost twice as much for it because your 8 times is worth 4 times to them. So, right, your 8 times, they can double EBITDA. So if they pay 8 times for something, it's going to be twice as much as it's worth to you. And then they can immediately get kind of a multiples expansion by having this in the public markets because the public market expectation for returns is considerably lower. So as you can tell, I mean, all we do is kind of sell companies up the food chain. But what are the key drivers to this? And that's the key element of this video, is thinking of it, what is it worth to the buyer? What is the implied EBITDA to them? What multiple can they pay on that? And what are the drivers of it? It's always going to be the same two things: access and capabilities. Access and capabilities. We bang the drum on these things all day when we're talking to people. And when they say, you know what, I might want to sell to a standalone private equity, I might want to sell to an independent sponsor, I might want to sell to a search fund, that can work, right? It's not to say that that doesn't work, and that's why we do turn over all those rocks and have those dialogues. However, when you can find the missing puzzle piece for someone very big, when you can find that the implied EBITDA at a healthy multiple is considerably more than kind of the free market multiple, that's where magic can happen. That is why strategics oftentimes can pay more. And that is why the bulk of our practice in our firm and our company is selling companies, again, smaller. It could be $3 billion company, it could be $1 billion company, it could be $100 million company, it could be a $10 million company, but selling things up the food chain where there's an access or capability that someone would rather buy versus build, where it is the missing puzzle piece. And we don't say this facetiously, but the logic is always, you can have things good, fast, and cheap. Pick two, right? And so if you want something good, if you want it fast, it's not going to be cheap. And people understand this, and this is the way of the world, and this is how M&A works, and therefore they will pay a premium, and it can be a win-win for everybody. No one's getting fleeced, no one's getting the wool pulled over their eyes. It's just somebody needs something, and it has more value in their kind of ecosystem than it does in yours. And that's perfectly fine. That's why things aggregate. So that is a thought for today. Why do private equity, excuse me, why do strategics pay more for companies on average? And whether it's a standalone strategic or a institutional or private equity backed strategic, why do they do it? Access or capabilities, implied EBITDA, missing puzzle piece, buy versus build. These are all ideas you should be thinking about if you're contemplating selling your company. Now, the magic to it, and perhaps the subject for a later video, is who do you talk to? How do you get them on the phone? How do you communicate with them? How do you get them to pay attention? How do you pitch the idea? How do you get them to buy into the idea? And how do you put it all together? Well, it's a little bit of art as well as science, another area we specialize in, and perhaps some ideas for a future video. But for now, that's the idea today. Why do strategics pay more, and how do you position it better? Concentrate on crystallizing access, concentrate on crystallizing capabilities. That's kind of the core nucleus of where the magic comes from. Hope the week continues to go well for everyone. Keep pushing forward. God bless. We'll see you next time.